Hey guys, tonight we drift slowly back to a time when justice moved at the pace of a limping mule, and lunch was an event you didn't recover from for hours. You're walking down a dusty street in a frontier town where even the breeze seems too lazy to blow. The sun hangs high above you, disinterested, like it's already seen this whole routine 1,000 times. There's the clang of a hammer somewhere, the creak of a saloon sign, and a general vibe of, "I'll do it later." Welcome to the Wild West, just slower. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive just after dawn in a town whose name you've already forgotten. Something like Cactus Bluff or Dry Creek, or maybe just the town. It's not important. What is important is that your boots kick up more dust than seems physically possible. The entire street is a low visibility zone. Someone sneezes 2 buildings down and you get a whiff of it. Buildings lean against each other like they're waiting for retirement. Wooden signs dangle from rusty chains. There's a general store, a jailhouse, a saloon, and of course, a livery where one suspiciously thin horse appears to be sighing. You head toward the saloon because, obviously, the swinging doors creak with drama. Inside, it smells like old beer, wet leather, and something sour that no one acknowledges. A piano sits in the corner, bravely pretending to still be in tune. Behind the bar, a man polishes a glass that doesn't want to be clean. He nods without looking up. You order coffee. He chuckles. "Sure, partner, we got water that once met a coffee bean." You drink it anyway. It tastes like disappointment and grit. Congratulations, you're officially one of the locals. Outside, people start to shuffle into life. A man in suspenders yawns so hard his hat falls off. A woman sweeps dust off her porch, which is basically like trying to empty the ocean with a teacup. 2 boys chase a chicken that seems to be in charge. The sheriff hasn't come out yet, but no one's worried. He's probably still trying to lace up his boots without throwing out his back. Historians still debate whether these towns really functioned or simply tolerated each other long enough to qualify as civilization. What they do agree on is this: mornings were the only part of the day when anyone had the energy to care about justice. And even then, justice took its sweet time. Someone points toward the far end of the street. There's where the duel happened. You squint. It's just dirt. When, you ask? Oh, must have been, Tuesday. There's a long pause. Or a Thursday. Yep. No one seems to remember the details, and honestly, no one seems to want to. Your attention drifts to a man dragging a crate labeled, "Dried beans, don't question it." You make the rookie mistake of asking what they're for. "Everything," he says. "Soup, stew, trade, and sometimes ammo." You hope he's joking. He isn't. As the sun climbs, so does the heat. It bakes the town slowly, like bread you didn't ask for. The saloon's doors stick from the humidity. A dog gives up halfway across the street and naps directly in the path of a wagon. The driver waits, shrugs, and joins him. Everything about the place whispers, "Don't rush." Even the wind seems to pause and consider whether blowing is worth the effort. You stroll past the jailhouse, where a bored man in a cell waves at you with the enthusiasm of week-old bread. He explains he turned himself in for stealing his own horse, just to get some shade. You nod politely and keep walking. At the edge of town, you find a sign half buried in sand. It reads, "Welcome to Dust Elm. Pop fluctuates." You wonder if it's meant to be a joke. You also wonder if you're already sunstroked. By mid-morning, it's clear. This place is allergic to action. You're sweating in places you didn't know could sweat, and your teeth feel dusty. You're pretty sure your thoughts have slowed down to match the town speed limit, whatever that is. The sheriff finally emerges. He yawns like a bear and adjusts his badge with a finger that might actually be a sausage. His mustache moves independently of his mouth. You follow him toward the jailhouse, and the entire town seems to agree. Yup, things are happening now. Slowly. Eventually. But for now, you sip another cup of coffee water and listen to the breeze complain. Welcome to the sleepy West. And don't worry, nothing important ever happens before lunch. You follow the sheriff into his office, a structure that seems to have been built primarily out of crooked nails and optimism. The wooden floor creaks like it's auditioning for a haunted house, and there's a faint smell of scorched beans lingering in the air. A slow ceiling fan spins overhead, not that it's doing anything remotely useful, and a cat you hadn't noticed blinks once from a shelf, then returns to its long, pointed nap. The sheriff slumps into his chair with the elegance of a sack of flour hitting the ground. His desk is an archaeological dig of half-finished reports, unpaid bar tabs, a mysterious shoe with no known owner, and at least 3 coffee mugs that may or may not have been growing civilizations of their own. He sighs deeply. You sense it's a daily ritual. "Welcome," he mutters. "You're just in time for the quiet part." You glance around. Nothing is moving, including the sheriff's deputy, who is sitting on a stool in the corner, slowly whittling a piece of wood that might someday be more wood. The sheriff begins sorting through papers with the enthusiasm of a man rereading instructions for a fence that was built wrong 10 years ago. Complaint about a goat? Disagreement at the livery? Someone says their hat was stolen again. He gestures toward a small blackboard that reads in smudged chalk, "Crime this week. One very loud argument about cornbread." You sit down on a nearby bench. The cushion is stuffed with horsehair, and you immediately regret it. As you shift, you spot a wanted poster pinned to the wall. The outlaw's face is mostly mustache, and the reward is $12 and 1 pair of boots, slightly used. Outside the window, 2 old men are arguing over which of them first invented the phrase, "Well, I'll be." A tumbleweed drifts by like it's late for an appointment. You lean back, and the sheriff starts talking again, mostly to himself. People think being a lawman is all shootouts and horseback chases. Truth is, most days I spend longer arguing with the mayor about the jail's chicken feed budget. And speaking of chickens, one saunters into the office like it owns the place. No one reacts. You ask about duels? The sheriff grimaces. Used to be more common, but after that chili cook-off last summer, no one's had the stomach for it. Which brings us to the reason you're really here, the curious case of why duels never seem to happen after lunch. The sheriff waves vaguely at the sun streaming through the window. Heat, beans, general lethargy, he says. You try facing off against a man when your belt won't buckle and you're 2 spoons away from a nap. Historians still debate whether post-meal fatigue actually prevented violence or if towns simply developed an unspoken rule that siestas took precedence over shootouts. Either way, after noon, tempers cooled, or at least were too full to act. There's a faint tapping sound. You turn to see the deputy has fallen asleep while still technically whittling. The wood chip pile continues to grow without him. You wander over to the sheriff's filing cabinet, which doesn't quite open. He shrugs. You gotta kick it first. Inside, you find carefully labeled files like suspected pie theft, unconfirmed, missing trousers incident, the Great Mustard Disagreement of '73, and then, nestled between them, is a folder labeled Duels, post-lunch. You open it slowly, like it might explode. It doesn't, but it is, interestingly, completely empty. You glance at the sheriff. "We tried once," he says with a wince. "Two fellas met outside the saloon at 1:30, drew their guns, and then just stood there. One of them belched so loud he forgot what he was mad about." You nod solemnly. You understand now. Justice has a schedule, and digestion is not to be rushed. Outside, a bell chimes lazily from the blacksmith's forge. The sheriff stretches, joints popping like kindling. "Well," he says, "guess I better go yell at the undertaker again. He's been sleeping in the wrong caskets." He grabs his hat, adjusts it by exactly 3 degrees, and steps into the blinding light. You remain seated for a moment, the lazy fan groaning above you, the chicken now asleep on a file folder marked urgent. Sometimes the Wild West isn't wild, it's just tired. The afternoon slouches along like a donkey with no plans. You step out of the sheriff's office, squinting against the midday glare. The boardwalk planks under your boots radiate heat like a skillet left on the stove too long. Even the flies seem to buzz in slow motion. Across the street, the general store's door creaks open and close in the wind, though no one goes in or out. A tumbleweed makes another appearance, possibly the same one from earlier, on its 3rd lazy loop through town. You pass by a barber shop where the barber is asleep in his own chair. The sign in the window reads, "Haircuts, tooth pulling, gossip, 0.5 cents extra." Next door, the saloon looms. Its batwing doors flap idly, almost inviting you in. The saloon is where things tend to happen in this town, or more often, fail to happen. You step inside, and instantly it feels 10 degrees cooler. Not because of any sophisticated ventilation system, but because the building is mostly shade and sawdust. The piano in the corner plays a single out-of-tune note as someone bumps into it. No one reacts. You take a seat at the bar. The bartender nods without enthusiasm and places a glass of something vaguely brown in front of you. You ask him, point blank, "Why do people stop dueling after lunch?" He wipes the counter with a cloth that might have once been a shirt. "Because nobody wants to get shot with a full stomach," he says simply. And it's true. There's a certain heaviness that comes with a plate of beans, cornbread, and sun-drenched lassitude. Apparently, even revenge has digestive limits. He leans in conspiratorially. It's not just that folks get sleepy, it's also logistics. You raise an eyebrow. Sun's too bright, too hot, and shadows get weird. One time, 2 fellas tried to duel after stew. Shadow made one of them look 10 feet tall. He panicked, tripped over a chicken, and broke his toe before they even drew. You sip your drink. It's liquid, at least. Historians have noted that post-noon duels are suspiciously absent from town records. Some argue it's because justice in the Old West was swift and occurred at sunrise. Others point to more practical reasons. Dueling with sweat in your eyes and a gut full of molasses isn't exactly heroic. There's also the afternoon doctrine, an unofficial town-by-town rule that any serious disputes should wait until dusk, after people have rested, watered their horses, and perhaps reconsidered how much they actually care about that card game or the accidental insult involving someone's sister and a particularly ugly mule. You wander toward the back of the saloon, where two old-timers are playing cards. One glances up. "You looking to start a fight?" You shake your head. "Good. I got biscuits in me and I ain't ready to die till they settle." They return to their game, which appears to have no clear rules, no visible stakes, and possibly no end. You examine a faded poster on the wall. "Duel at dawn. Judge supplied. Coffee optional." You notice a line scrawled beneath it in pencil. "Afternoon, nope." You ask the bartender if there were ever exceptions. He nods slowly. "Once. Big fella named Cactus Jim, meanest man west of the Pecos, challenged a dentist at 2 p.m. on the 4th of July. You lean in. "What happened?" "Sunstroke. Both of them passed out before the count of 3. They woke up the next morning sharing a water jug and talking about dental hygiene. Never fought again." And that's the thing about duels in the daylight. They require clarity, precision, and, frankly, a reason. Most grievances don't hold up after a good lunch and a slow, dusty afternoon. Outside the saloon window, you spot a man arguing with a cactus. The cactus seems to be winning. You sip again. You feel relaxed. Not sleepy yet, but drifting, like a train gently pulling away from the station, unhurried and half empty. A tinny bell rings as someone enters. The piano sighs again, offering the same discordant note. The sheriff steps in, hat now dusty, shirt slightly more wrinkled. He looks around, sees you, and nods. "Still alive?" You nod back. "Good, means it's still before supper." He orders a sarsaparilla, slides into a booth, and immediately closes his eyes. You look around. Nobody's dueling. Nobody's even arguing. A chicken walks across the bar floor. A man plays harmonica, out of tune, and nobody tells him to stop. The Old West, it seems, is not always wild. Sometimes it just wants a nap. The afternoon settles like dust on a porch swing. Quiet, stubborn, and not going anywhere soon. You're still at the saloon, but now perched on the window ledge, boots resting on a barrel that might once have held pickles or gunpowder or both. The day hums around you. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barks once and then regrets the effort. The heat has entered its lazy phase. Not hot enough to kill you, just enough to melt your ambition into a small, sticky puddle. You lean your head against the window frame and watch the nothing unfold. Across the street, the sheriff's horse stands perfectly still, not tied up, just standing there like it understands that running away would take too much energy. It blinks once, then sighs. Inside the saloon, a card game has transitioned into a nap. You see a man still holding 3 queens in one hand, chin slumped into his chest like he lost a bet with gravity. You ask yourself, how did this place ever get the reputation of being wild? Turns out, most of the Wild West wasn't shootouts and chaos, it was paperwork. Tedious, dusty paperwork. You'd think a town with 2 saloons and only 1 doctor wouldn't generate many legal disputes. You'd be wrong. Sheriffs like you spend most afternoons not in gunfights, but mediating land squabbles between neighbors arguing over whose chickens wandered where, or who technically owns the rain barrel when it's exactly half on the property line. One notable case involved a pig named Mortimer. Mortimer belonged to Widow Langley, but the pig developed a mysterious attachment to the general store, sleeping on the loading dock every night. The store owner claimed squatters' rights. A town meeting was called. Testimonies were delivered. Mortimer slept through the entire proceeding. He eventually chose to live behind the apothecary, ending the feud but not the paperwork. You remember that one fondly. Historically, many Western sheriffs were elected, not appointed. And being elected meant you had to maintain a reputation. Yes, for toughness, but more importantly, for fairness. You couldn't just go around shooting people willy-nilly. That sort of thing would lose you the next election. Historians point to this as one of the reasons duels declined in the latter half of the 19th century. As towns formalized, people realized that a steady sheriff and a quiet town increased the chances of mail arriving on time and not getting scalped over breakfast. One lesser-known fact, some towns issued duel permits. Yup, just like a fishing license, except instead of trout, you were hoping to catch a bullet. These permits often required you to post a bond in case of property damage and notify witnesses in advance. One town in Arizona even required duelists to bring their own undertakers, just in case. Of course, most people didn't duel. They threatened to, they talked about it. Sometimes they stared dramatically across a dusty street, hands hovering near holsters like actors in a bad play. But rarely did anyone actually draw. Why? Because everyone knew that if you drew and missed, you'd be the punchline of every porch story for the next 5 years. And if you drew and hit, well, then there was a funeral, and those were surprisingly expensive. Back at the bar, the bartender is now polishing a bottle that doesn't seem to need polishing. You ask him if he's ever seen a duel in town. Once, he says, 2 brothers argued over a horse at high noon, naturally. What happened? They both forgot their pistols, ended up wrestling in a horse trough. One of them got a splinter. Duel declared a draw. A fly buzzes by your ear. You flick it away half-heartedly. It doesn't take the hint. A lot of Old West violence, you realize, is just that. Overblown, mythologized, sanitized for stage plays and penny novels. In reality, life out here was dull in a specific, crunchy way. There were long stretches of nothing, punctuated by random inconveniences, like your horse losing a shoe or your roof blowing off mid-biscuit. People passed the time in the most human ways possible, by gossiping, playing cards, inventing dances with 2 steps and 6 different names, and arguing over chili recipes. Some towns even had nap rules posted in public buildings, essentially siesta hours, when no legal business or public disputes could be conducted. Too cranky to reason, one such rule stated. Try again after pie. You remember once breaking up a potential fight between 2 men outside the post office. One of them was furious because the other had taken his mail by mistake and then opened it, thinking it was his own. The letter in question? A bill for 6 pounds of flour and a gently worded love poem from someone named Mabel. The accused man was mortified, not because of the intrusion, but because he didn't have a Mabel of his own. They ended up sitting on the porch together, talking about their exes. You bought them lemonade and called it a draw. Your thoughts drift back to the sheriff's badge on your chest. It's warm from the sun, slightly askew. You adjust it out of habit. It's not much protection, but it does mean something. Mostly that you're the person people look to when they forget how to be civil after too many beans. The bartender is now nodding off behind the counter, head tilted back like a folding chair mid-collapse. You think about standing up, about going back outside, but your limbs disagree. The day still has hours left, but none of them feel urgent. Somewhere in the corner, a clock ticks. It's the loudest sound in the room. You close your eyes for a moment and imagine being the kind of person who challenges someone to a duel at this exact hour. But instead of drawing your gun, you just sigh, stretch your back, and say, "Let's settle this over pie," because that's the real wisdom of the Old West. The shadows start to lean longer now, like tired elbows on a table. You finally step outside, the wooden porch creaking in acknowledgement. The sky above stretches out wide and blank, like someone forgot to finish painting it. Just blue and dry air, with a single buzzard making lazy circles like it's judging your life choices. The street is mostly empty. A few folks drift by, each moving at the pace of someone trying not to sweat more than absolutely necessary. Somewhere down the way, a piano tinkles out a broken tune from behind a half-open saloon window. 2 notes sharp, 1 note sad. You walk down the boardwalk, tipping your hat automatically, even though no one's looking. As you pass the sheriff's office, you hear it again. Someone asking about a duel. Not loudly, not seriously, but in that half-joking, half-daring way folks sometimes do when they've had just enough whiskey and absolutely nothing better to do. You step inside. The jail cell is empty. Has been for weeks. The last person to sleep in there was the town baker, who accidentally locked himself in during a very heated game of checkers. He'd gone in to check the locks, sat down to think, and dozed off. You found him the next morning with flour on his boots and a look that said, "Please never mention this again." There's a man now standing by your desk. He's young, with a mustache that's clearly still on probation. His hat's too big, and his confidence is borrowed, probably from a dime novel. "I need a permit to duel," he says. You sigh, louder than you meant to. "We don't do those anymore." "But I was challenged," he insists. "Was it before or after lunch?" "Right after." You shake your head like a disappointed school teacher. "Well, there's your problem," you explain, as if this is something everyone knows, that post-lunch duels are a terrible idea. Your reflexes are slower, your aim's off, and statistically, someone always throws up. There's a half-truth in that. Sheriffs back in the day didn't just avoid duels after lunch because of digestion. It was also about the town. Midday was when most folks were finally awake and busy. Children ran errands, storefronts bustled. Shooting someone at 2:30 p.m. meant you'd probably hit a witness, or worse, damage the laundry line and incur the wrath of every woman in town. One sheriff in New Mexico actually posted a sign, "No duels after 1 p.m. Violators will be mocked." There's some historical debate about how widespread these informal policies were, but plenty of accounts suggest that sheriffs and mayors and judges deliberately encouraged duels to happen at inconvenient hours, like dawn or during Sunday sermon. Just enough hassle to make people reconsider. Back in your office, you offer the kid a sarsaparilla and ask him who challenged him. He mumbles a name you half recognize, a stable boy with more opinions than horses. What was it about? He hesitates. He said my boots squeak like a frightened raccoon. You stare at him. The silence stretches. And you want to shoot him over that? "Well," he mutters, "they do squeak." You lean back in your chair, which groans louder than any horse you've ever met. The kid looks embarrassed now. His hat has sunk down slightly, like it's trying to disassociate from him. You offer him some advice. Not the kind you learned from a law book, but the kind you learned from watching this town operate like a badly tuned fiddle. Go challenge him to a boot polishing contest, you say. Loser buys lemonade. He squints. That's not very dramatic. Nope, you agree, but you'll both live. Outside, a breeze stumbles through town, kicks up some dust, and then gives up halfway. You're not sure when it happened exactly, but at some point, the myth of the gunslinging West overtook the reality. Most towns didn't have a Main Street showdown every week. They had two, maybe, usually involving an in-law dispute or someone losing their mule in a poker game. The real duel was always between boredom and bad decisions. There's one famous case that historians love to bring up. The duel that was scheduled for noon sharp in Abilene, but delayed until after dinner because both men showed up in the same shirt. Neither wanted to be buried looking like the other, so they adjourned, found new shirts, got distracted by pie, and never reconvened. Some say it's apocryphal. Others claim there's a gravestone somewhere that simply reads, "Almost." Back in the present, the kid has finished his sarsaparilla and decided not to die today. He thanks you and leaves, his boots squeaking like nervous mice. You write "Squeaky Boots Resolved" in the town ledger and feel oddly satisfied. You glance at the clock on the wall. Still plenty of daylight left for people to get into trouble, but also enough for most of them to talk themselves out of it. You step outside again, and the street greets you like an old friend who knows your favorite excuses. The piano's still at it. Wrong key, right feeling. You tip your hat again. Still no one watching, but that's all right. That's kind of the point. The afternoon drips into early evening like honey off a slow spoon. You settle back onto the porch, nursing a warm mug of coffee you didn't ask for but found comforting anyway. It tastes like regret and burnt beans, but at this hour, you're not looking for luxury. You're looking for ritual. Something to hold on to while the day loosens its grip. A dog trots by without a leash or direction, tail wagging like it's in on a secret. You nod to it. It ignores you, as all the best dogs do. Somewhere down the block, a pair of kids argue over who would win in a duel, their Uncle Bill or a rattlesnake that's had a rough morning. You listen with half an ear. The arguments are surprisingly sophisticated. One brings up the snake's agility, the other Uncle Bill's homemade armor, fashioned from baking pans and 2 belts. You close your eyes briefly and think, this is exactly why the West never ran out of stories, just out of people willing to fact-check them. Your own hat sits on your lap, soft with sweat and history. It's not just protection from the sun, it's a symbol, one people squint at when deciding how seriously to take you. You once watched a man back down from a fight, not because you drew your gun, but because you tilted your hat in just the right way. The psychology of hat angles could fill a book, probably already has. You think about the most famous duel that never was, Sheriff Matty Griggs versus Lucky Caldwell in 1879. Supposed to happen outside the general store at high noon. Caldwell arrived at 11:58. Griggs showed up at 12:01. Both claimed the other had defaulted by tardiness. They argued about it for half an hour, then went inside for lemonade. They later opened a barbershop together. Historians still debate whether it was all a ruse. Some say it was a clever way for Griggs to dodge a fight without losing face. Others insist it was genuine confusion caused by competing pocket watches. Either way, the result was the same: 2 less bullet holes in the dirt and a surprisingly good haircut. You get up and wander toward the general store, the boards underfoot telling stories with every creak. Inside, it smells like dust and dill pickles. A bell above the door announces your arrival, though nobody looks up. You exchange a few pleasantries with Mrs. Elkins, who runs the place like a schoolteacher runs a rowdy classroom, with equal parts fear and affection. She tells you someone's been stealing licorice again, probably one of the Jenkins twins, or both. They operate like one soul split into 2 bodies, and neither has a strong grasp on consequences. You promise to look into it, but you both know you won't. The Jenkins twins always return what they steal within 3 days, usually with a note and a drawing of a sad raccoon as an apology. You buy some soap, a box of matches, and a single lemon. Not because you need a lemon, but because it feels like something a responsible adult would do. Back outside, the wind picks up a little. Not a real wind, just enough to make you think about laundry and paperweights. You spot a man across the street spinning his revolver on one finger like he's auditioning for a silent movie that hasn't been invented yet. He's doing it badly. You walk over, he sees you coming and stops mid-spin, trying to make it look like he was just cleaning it. "Something I can help you with?" you ask, the way someone might ask a rooster why it's attending a tea party. "Just practicing," he says, sheepish. "Mind if I offer some advice?" He nods, clearly expecting something tactical, something about wrist angles or finger placement. "Don't," you say. He blinks. You want to impress people, learn to make a stew that doesn't scare livestock. He doesn't quite know how to respond, so he tips his hat and disappears into the stable. It's funny, everyone imagines the Wild West as a place of constant action, of duels on every corner and bar fights spilling into the dusty streets. But in reality, it was mostly like this. Long stretches of nothing peppered with bursts of something that probably could have been avoided with a nap and a sandwich. One historian called it America's quietest chaos. Another claimed that if you removed the myths, what remained was just a lot of dry mouths and unspoken grudges. You make your way back to the office, just as the sky starts changing color. Not dramatically, just a gentle nudge from gold to rust to that deep purple that makes you wish you were better at poetry. Inside, the air smells of old paper and leather. You sit at your desk, open the town logbook, and make a few notes. Boot squeak incident resolved. Revolver spinner advised to stop. Lemon acquired. Potential moral victory. You lean back and listen to the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. Somewhere in the distance, a harmonica starts up, off-key but honest. It sounds like someone remembering a song they once heard in a dream. And just for a moment, everything is still. Not quiet exactly, just at peace. The kind of peace that comes not from silence, but from the absence of things trying too hard. You close the logbook, set your hat back on your head, and step out into the gathering dusk. The street meets you like an old friend again. The sky is a bruise fading into velvet, and somewhere out there, someone is almost certainly planning a duel, but not tonight. The air shifts, that moment when the day exhales and night tiptoes in, half apologizing for being late. You stand outside your office, hat casting a long shadow, and breathe in the familiar smell of creosote, dry dust, and something that might be chicken stew from the boarding house across the way. The town settles. Kids are corralled indoors. Lanterns blink awake in windows. You can hear someone sweeping a porch, deliberate, slow, like they're trying not to disturb the memory of the day. A horse nickers somewhere. Another responds with a disinterested snort. You smile. Even the animals here understand timing. You stroll toward the livery, hands in your coat pockets, not looking for trouble, just checking in on the places where it tends to loiter. The stable smells like hay, sweat, and secrets. Inside, old Clarence is brushing down a mule with the kind of affection usually reserved for family or very reliable frying pans. He nods at you, not stopping the brush. You ask him if the horses have been spooked lately. He shrugs. Just one, he says, but she spooks if a cloud looks at her wrong. Fair enough. You scratch the mule's ears and move on, feet crunching softly on the path. The night has rhythm now, a slow lullaby of creaks, rustles, and murmured conversations. You pass by the jailhouse, where Deputy Len is asleep with his boots on the desk and a moth doing slow circles around the oil lamp. You don't wake him. If someone wanted to break into the jail tonight, they'd probably just leave a note saying, "Let's try this another day." And you'd understand. You veer toward the edge of town, where fences start to forget their fences and tumble into suggestion. There's a house here, not big, not fancy, just upright enough to avoid being a shed. A woman stands on the porch, watching the stars the way some people watch their laundry dry, with purpose, but not expectation. Her name's Elsie. She ran the post office for a while until it burned down on a Tuesday. Nobody was hurt, but the mail was deeply offended. You say hello. She says the stars seem louder tonight. You agree, even though you're not sure what she means. You both stand in companionable silence for a few minutes. A cricket decides this is a good moment for a solo. You give it a mental applause. Eventually, she says, "You know why there's no duels after dark?" You don't, actually. You've always assumed it was visibility or manners. She shakes her head, still looking up. Because after sundown, people remember they have things to lose. That sticks with you. Not like a burr, more like a lyric you don't understand yet, but can't stop humming. You tip your hat and keep walking, chewing on the thought. Maybe she's right. Maybe light makes people braver or dumber. Maybe it's harder to be dramatic when it's bedtime and your socks are already off. You pause near the water trough, looking down into its still surface. Your reflection looks tired, but honest. You decide that's not a bad combination. Behind you, someone clears their throat. You turn. It's Thomas Finch, local undertaker and part-time philosopher. He always looks like he's halfway through writing his memoirs in his head. He nods. "Evening," he says. You return it. "Thinking about duels?" he asks. Because of course he would. You admit it. He considers you. "You know what I've noticed? Folks who ask for a duel never expect to die in one." You arch an eyebrow. They imagine themselves walking away slow, with a scar and a story, never the casket. You say that sounds grim for a bedtime chat. He shrugs. "I prepare for worst-case scenarios. It's literally my job." Fair point. You both fall silent. Then he adds, "Also, stomachs full of beans and biscuits make for poor reflexes. That's probably the real reason they avoid post-lunch gunfights." You chuckle. He's not wrong. A mosquito lands on your hand. You wave it off with more ceremony than necessary. Thomas watches and smirks. "I hear in some towns," he says, "they banned dueling within 30 feet of a bakery." You ask if that's true. "Does it matter?" he replies. And no, it really doesn't. You part ways, and as you head back through town, the lamps are lower now, the doors all shut. Curtains drawn, rocking chairs still. You walk slower than before, like the town's pulse is winding down and you don't want to interrupt it. At the corner, someone's left a pie to cool on their windowsill. It smells like apples and good intentions. You do not steal it, but you let the scent follow you a while, like a dog that just wants to be near nice things. You return to your office, where the lamp's still burning and the chair still remembers your shape. You sit, you exhale, and somewhere out there, past the edges of town and the fences that have stopped trying, the stars are out, quiet, constant, watching everything from a distance, the way you sometimes wish you could. No gunfights tonight, no duels, just the sound of night settling into itself, like an old coat finally finding its hook. You wake early, because of course you do. The town hasn't yet rubbed the sleep from its eyes, but your boots are already on, creaking against the warped floorboards of your office. There's a hush, the kind that hangs just before sunrise, like the world's waiting to see what kind of day it wants to be. You step outside. The sky is pink, like someone tried to paint a serious morning but spilled strawberry milk across the canvas. A lone rooster crows, then immediately regrets it. The quiet clings. Your first stop is the diner, or more accurately, Miss Henrietta's kitchen with a sign out front. She's been making coffee since before the war, though which war depends on who's asking. You sit at your usual table, nod at the same chipped mug as always, and wait for the aroma of something burnt but loving to fill the room. Today, it's corn cakes. Yesterday, it was regrets and molasses. Both work. Henrietta eyes you as she pours the coffee. Heard any good threats lately? You shake your head. Just one man arguing with a goat. The goat was winning. She snorts. That's how revolutions start, you know. You don't doubt it. Over breakfast, your mind drifts. Not to crime or law or whatever the mayor's latest concern is. No, it drifts to what makes people snap just before high noon. Not hunger, not rage, something deeper. Pride wrapped in dust and overheated boots. You've seen it enough to recognize the signs. And it never ends with someone feeling satisfied, just quieter. You finish your meal and leave a coin on the counter, more for her wit than the food, though both are plenty sharp. The door jingles behind you like a punchline, and you step back into the slow building day. The town's starting to move. Not quickly, nothing here does, but with a rhythm. Someone sweeps a step. A boy chases a chicken with unclear intentions. Horses chew hay with the kind of purpose you wish humans had. You make your way down to the general store, not for supplies, just for faces. Familiarity. Mr. Pendleton is already complaining about the price of nails, and Mrs. Whitker is insisting the flour has been less flowery lately. You nod where appropriate, interject a soft, maybe it's the humidity when necessary, and allow yourself the quiet pleasure of not being shot at. Because that's the thing. People think being a sheriff is about the standoffs, the big moments. But most of the job is knowing which widow prefers which side of the porch, and who's hiding chickens in their outhouse. You leave the store with a tin of peppermints and a new anecdote about a runaway butter churn. It's enough. Next stop, the schoolhouse. Not because there's trouble, but because there's a chalkboard with your name on it. Literally. Miss Lucinda likes you to give talks to the kids. Something about community and choices. You suspect it's also because she enjoys seeing you awkward in front of a dozen small humans who ask things like, "What happens if a bandit has two hats?" You enter mid-recitation of the alphabet, greeted by a wall of noise and a smell best described as ink and optimism. The kids cheer when they see you. You hold up your hands like you're surrendering, which earns a laugh. Lucinda smiles and steps aside. They've been asking about duels again. Of course they have. You take the floor and launch into the day's lesson, which is mostly about how shooting someone because they looked at you funny isn't nearly as satisfying as learning how to spell rhubarb. One boy raises his hand and wants to know if you've ever lost a duel. You tell him the truth. I've avoided them all. A few groans, a few nods. You elaborate. Because if you win, you get regrets. And if you lose, you get buried. They go quiet. One girl writes that down like it's going on a poster. You thank them for their time and duck out before they ask about outlaws with pet snakes again. You're not emotionally ready for that conversation. As the sun climbs higher, the town grows warmer. Not hot yet, but the kind of warm that makes everyone squint and reconsider leather. You retreat to the shade, finding solace on the bench outside the barber shop. You pretend to read a paper, though you mostly watch. Across the street, two men argue about fence lines. It gets heated. One pokes the other in the chest. You shift, but don't rise. Not yet. Then, miracle! They pause, look embarrassed, and shake hands. You lean back, satisfied. It's a good day. Later, you'll have to check in on the new family at the edge of town. He's a blacksmith. She used to be a teacher. Their daughter thinks your badge is made of real gold. You don't correct her. But for now, you just sit. The air smells like dust and coming rain, though the clouds are still negotiating. A dog sleeps under a wagon. A man hums while fixing a window shutter. Everything feels intact. You think about that question again. Why no duels after lunch? The longer you live here, the more you realize it's not about custom or code. It's about digestion, about reflection, about realizing you'd rather finish the rest of your day than become someone else's anecdote. You close your eyes for a moment. No gunshots, no shouting. Just the creak of a rocking chair somewhere and the gentle thump of your own heartbeat, like a quiet drum saying, "Still here, still here, still here." You wake from your midday doze to the unmistakable sound of a cowbell and a harmonica playing slightly off-key. No one's in a hurry to fix either. That's Jasper. He's the town's unofficial alarm clock and official eccentric. Every day around this time, he walks the main street with his goat, Muriel, and provides a soundtrack that's equal parts charming and confusing. You nod at him. He nods back, then doffs his hat to the goat. It's unclear who's sheriff of whom in that partnership. It's post-lunch now. The sun has peaked and is beginning its slow descent. But the air is heavier, lazier. People tend to move slower, not because they want to, but because their bodies are staging small revolts over the stew and biscuits they consumed earlier. Even the horses look like they're considering a career change. And it's in this window, this golden, glistening, digestive lull, that duels become increasingly rare. You stand, stretch your back, and think of the last time someone actually tried to draw in the afternoon heat. It was Jedediah Stroud, a man who fancied himself faster than light and only slightly less intelligent than a bag of oats. He challenged a gambler who'd miscounted cards, then paused mid-threat to belch so hard he startled his own horse. The gambler, unimpressed, offered him a mint and went on his way. You pass the saloon now, where someone plays the piano just competently enough that you can recognize the tune. A few men lounge in the shade outside, sipping sarsaparilla and pretending they're important. Inside, it smells like sweat, cedar, and yesterday's triumphs. You make a mental note to stop in later, not for a drink, but for the backroom check-in. Every saloon has one. A quiet conversation with the bartender about what didn't happen that day. Outside again, you find yourself wandering toward the edge of town, where the buildings give way to pasture and the quiet gets louder. You pass Doc Avery's place. His sign says surgeon, dentist, and small engine repair, though no one's really sure what the last one entails. He's sitting out front, cleaning spectacles that he almost never wears. When he sees you, he waves with a hand wrapped in gauze. "Don't ask," he says, so you don't. There's an apothecary next door, operated by a woman named Marguerite, who insists on being called Miss. She grows her own herbs and talks to them like difficult children. You ask how her chamomile is doing. She frowns, still sulking, like a teenager. She hands you a pouch of dried leaves, for sleep or diplomacy, depending on how you brew it. You thank her and promise to bring her some gossip in return. She snorts. "Bring me quiet, that's worth more." Back in town, you see two boys practicing their draw with sticks, crouching low like characters from penny novels. They spot you and freeze. One of them shouts, "We're just training in case outlaws come." You nod solemnly. Then aim for the knees. Outlaws hate that. They both laugh and scramble away, probably to invent their own badges out of bottle caps. You continue walking and notice how the air is starting to cool. Shadows stretch longer. Afternoon is giving its seat up to evening. That transition brings a new kind of restlessness, less violent, more philosophical. Men start wondering if they lived a good day. Women tally what's left to do before sunset. Even the dogs reposition themselves to catch the breeze. You return to the jailhouse, which remains exactly as empty and mildly disappointing as you left it. The cot still creaks, the keys still jangle, the coffee's still bad. You sip it anyway. Then you begin your paperwork, which is about 80% speculation and 20% trying to spell trespassing without help. In one report, you mentioned that the Johnson boy has finally stopped throwing apples at passing wagons. In another, you quietly suggest that Mr. Davenport's claim of a cursed fence might just be termites. You pause to scribble a note to yourself, "Buy more pencils." And as you work, you remember how duels weren't always frowned upon. In the early days, back when this place was barely more than dust and ambition, duels were seen as clarifying. People believed they settled things, but you've lived through enough sunrises to know better. Duels rarely solve anything, they just trade one tension for another. One grudge ends, another begins, usually carried by the widow or the brother or the friend with too much idle time. Historians still debate whether the decline of afternoon duels was cultural or practical. Some say it was the influence of preachers. Others argue it was just the digestion again. You think it's simpler. People just got tired. Tired of burying neighbors. Tired of explaining death to children. Tired of pretending honor is worth more than tomorrow's breakfast. So the afternoon became sacred. Not in a religious way, but in a collective exhale sort of way. A truce built on full stomachs and the mutual understanding that everyone would rather nap than bleed. You finish your paperwork with a final reluctant flourish, Then lean back, eyes closed, listening to the creak of the building as it settles. Somewhere, a bell rings. Maybe the schoolhouse, maybe Jasper again. Either way, it signals the last chapter of the day is starting. And there's something beautiful in that. You wake for the second time today, but this time with less grace. A breeze slips under the door and plays with the corner of a wanted poster tacked to the wall. It flaps lazily. Some drifter who stole 3 goats and a pie. And you've never bothered to take it down because, frankly, you respect the audacity. Outside, the light is warmer now. Late afternoon has painted everything gold, like someone tilted a whiskey bottle over the whole town. Dust rises slow and soft from the road as wagon wheels roll past in no particular hurry. You step outside and adjust your hat, mostly out of habit. The sun's angle makes everyone squint, so eye contact feels more meaningful, like shared survival. A woman named Clara passes by with a basket of bread and a rifle strapped across her back. She nods. "Quiet day?" she asks. You smile. No duels, just indigestion. She chuckles. Praise be. Back when you first took this job, you kept expecting to be tested, to face some dramatic showdown where you'd have to outdraw a bandit or tame a mob. What you got instead was something slower, heavier, more stubborn than any outlaw. Paperwork, lost goats, and an endless parade of minor misunderstandings. Like the case of the 2 farmers who nearly came to blows over who owned a wandering chicken. Or the man who reported a ghost only to realize it was his mother-in-law arriving early for supper. You became good at listening, at asking the right questions, and at deflecting duels. There's a trick to it. You don't say, "Don't fight." You say, "Wouldn't it be a shame if your hat got dusty again?" Or, "What would your grandmother think?" Or, if all else fails, "Let's settle it over pie." And most of the time, that works. You walk along the main street now, passing shuttered windows and the occasional dog asleep in the middle of the road. The town begins to quiet in the way small towns do, gradually, without announcement. Doors close, lamps are trimmed, conversations drop to whispers. At the edge of town, near the livery, a young man practices his draw with a mirror and an unloaded pistol. He's careful, precise, lost in it. You watch from a distance. When he notices you, he freezes, sheepish. "Just practicing," he mutters. You nod. That's how you know you're serious. The real ones don't practice. He thinks about that for a second, then laughs. Yeah, I guess that's true. You leave him with that thought, which isn't entirely true, but it's close enough for a young man looking to be something he doesn't quite understand. Historically, most shootouts in the West didn't happen the way the stories say. They weren't high noon affairs with dramatic pauses and tumbleweeds rolling by. They were messy, chaotic, often accidental. The guns misfired, the bullets missed. People screamed and ran. Someone tripped. But dime novels needed drama, so they edited the facts. They turned mishaps into legends. They gave names like The Shadow at Sundown to events that were mostly 2 men shouting and one of them falling down before the other even finished his sentence. Historians still argue about the most accurate depiction of a Western duel. Some favor court records. Others dig through letters or newspaper exaggerations. A few insist that oral history, even with all its embellishments, holds a more human truth. You lean toward the latter. Facts may tell you what happened, but stories tell you why it mattered. A tumbleweed finally does roll by. Not during a duel, just randomly. And you watch it meander down the street like it's looking for someone. Probably Jasper. Back at the jail, you find a small envelope slipped under the door. It's from Marguerite. Inside is a single sprig of lavender and a note that reads, "For your nerves and your coffee. They both need help." You smile. It's the closest thing you've had to romance in months. You add the lavender to your cup anyway. It doesn't help the flavor, but it makes you feel a little more dignified as you sip. As twilight approaches, a man named Earl ambles in to report that his fence has been stolen. All of it. You stare at him. The whole fence? Yup, gone, like a ghost, only with lumber. You write it down. Suspects. He shrugs. I mean, Steve's been looking at it funny for a while. You promise to look into it, and he leaves satisfied, though the odds of the fence returning are slim. Fences rarely come back on their own. Still, that's your job. Not to solve everything, but to make sure someone is keeping track. Someone who listens, writes things down, remembers who borrowed what from whom. And sometimes, just sometimes, your presence is enough to stop someone from making a terrible decision in the heat of pride and post-meal drowsiness. Because people forget that the Wild West wasn't just lawless, it was tired. It was dusty, hungry, sunburnt, and half sober. People wanted peace more than glory. They wanted shade more than justice. And most of all, they wanted someone who would stand between them and their worst instincts. That's you. And while the town may not say it out loud, they sleep better knowing you're there. The first stars are beginning to peek out, lazy and half-hearted above the warm haze of the horizon. You lean back in the creaky wooden chair on the porch of the jailhouse, boots propped up, hat tipped low. The air smells of dust, burnt coffee, and someone grilling something questionably edible 3 buildings over. You're not sure if it's pork or something more mysterious. Either way, you're not hungry enough to find out. A soft clinking sound draws your attention. It's the sound of metal being shuffled in pockets. Coins, maybe? You glance up and see old Mr. Finch walking toward you, using a cane that might have once been a broom handle. He's got a gleam in his eye and a folded paper in his hand. "You've been served," he says, grinning. You raise an eyebrow. "A lawsuit?" He cackles. No, bingo invitation." You sigh in relief that is only slightly exaggerated. Mr. Finch used to be the town blacksmith until he mistook his thumb for a horseshoe one too many times. Now he spends his evenings organizing competitive games that absolutely no one asked for. Bingo, marbles, speed sitting. "Big prize tonight," he says, waving the flyer. "A full pie, not even touched." You're tempted, but you also remember the last time someone won a pie in Finch's bingo tournament. It was filled with turnips. "I'll think about it," you say. Suit yourself. He shuffles off into the twilight, whistling something vaguely patriotic. Behind you, the jailhouse creaks as the wind picks up slightly. You feel the cooler air brush across your face like a passing thought. In towns like this, the night doesn't fall. It reclines, slowly, like a tired mule. Shadows stretch out with exaggerated laziness. Conversations quiet. Doors close with a soft finality. And that's when people start to remember their grievances. Not the serious ones. Those get dealt with during daylight hours. But the quiet, lingering annoyances, the ones that fester just enough to demand passive-aggressive action under cover of darkness. You stroll through town again, just to show your face. It's a trick you've learned. If people see you walking around, they're less likely to do something stupid. Visibility is prevention. As you pass by the general store, you hear someone mutter about how their neighbor's rooster crows with an attitude. You decide not to intervene unless feathers start flying. In the saloon, lights flicker and laughter spills out like syrup. Inside, you spot two men arguing over a game of cards. You pause, watching. Their gestures are wild, but the tone is lazy, not threatening. One of them throws his hands in the air and declares, "I'd rather arm wrestle a cactus than play another round with you." The other raises his glass in agreement. No duel needed. Historically, many towns had unspoken rules about nighttime duels. They were considered bad form. Not necessarily illegal, just tacky. If you were going to dramatically risk your life over an insult about your boots, at least do it in daylight where people could watch. There's an ongoing debate among historians about the frequency of these nighttime altercations. Some argue they were rare, reserved for particularly stubborn fools. Others suggest they happened often, but were downplayed or erased in retellings because they lacked theatrical flair. You walk on wondering which is closer to the truth. As you round the corner near the undertaker's office, who moonlights as a poet, because why not, you notice something peculiar. A pair of boots sticking out from behind a barrel, not moving. You approach cautiously. "Jasper," you say. A groan. He lifts his head, squinting. "I was just resting my eyes." "You're resting your whole body." "Didn't want to walk home. My horse judged me." You help him up, brushing off sawdust and something sticky you decide not to ask about. He thanks you with the sincerity of a man who will forget this conversation by morning. You let him lean on you as you walk him to his porch. His dog greets you both like royalty returning from war. Jasper manages to sit on the steps without tipping over. "You're a good sheriff," he says, suddenly serious. You shrug. "I'm just stubborn and still upright." He nods as if that confirms some great wisdom, then dozes off sitting up. You check his pockets just to make sure he doesn't have anything sharp. He doesn't. Just lint, a harmonica, and a single button with no known garment. Back at your office, you finally sit down and take off your boots. There's a small crack in the wall near your desk where a family of ants seems to be building an empire. You watch them for a while, vaguely impressed by their work ethic. In the corner, the jail cell is empty. Again. You think about how it's mostly decorative at this point. You haven't had a real prisoner in weeks. The last one was a man who turned himself in for stealing his own cow out of spite. You let him go after he apologized to himself. As the night deepens, you light the oil lamp and start your nightly ritual, reading a few pages from The Practical Guide to Conflict Avoidance, which is mostly common sense written in overly complicated language. But it comforts you. Tonight's passage reads, "To anticipate violence is to arm the spirit with foresight." You blink slowly, then underline it, even though you're not entirely sure what it means. Outside, an owl hoots, a board creaks. The wind whistles something mournful and gentle. You close your eyes for a moment, listening to the quiet. No duels, no drama, just a town sleeping under a quilt of stars, with you tucked into the corner like a watchful bookmark. And tomorrow? Well, tomorrow you'll probably be asked to mediate a dispute about laundry drying too close to someone else's fence. And somehow, that will be more dangerous than anything involving guns. The night slides further into stillness. The stars multiply above you, too many to count, and too shy to be seen all at once. You yawn long and slow, stretching until your shoulders pop. There's a calmness now, the kind that settles in towns like yours when all the arguments have paused and the only things stirring are breezes and memories. You rise from the chair and wander over to the hitching post, absently checking for loose knots in the rope. There's no horse there, of course, but you do it anyway. It's a habit, a reflex. Something about checking knots makes you feel like the world's still manageable. Then you hear it, a soft clink-clink behind the bakery. Could be a raccoon. Could be someone trying to break in for a midnight pastry. You hope it's the raccoon. He's less trouble. You ease around the corner, stepping lightly, hand hovering near your belt. Not on your gun, just near it. You don't want to scare anyone, or worse, overreact to someone stealing yesterday's bread. What you find is less dramatic. Timmy Baxter, age 10, crouched by a crate with a stick in one hand and a broken harmonica in the other. "Timmy," you whisper. He jumps, then squints. "Sheriff? What are you doing?" "I dropped a marble down the grate. I'm trying to get it back." You exhale slowly. You know what happens if you wake up Mrs. Winslow, right? She throws things? She throws accurately. Timmy nods solemnly. "I'll be quiet." You kneel down and fish out the marble with 2 fingers. Trying not to lose it again. He looks at you like you just saved his dog from a fire. "Thanks, Sheriff." He scampers off, and you watch until he's gone. That familiar warmth of small-town absurdity curling around you like steam from a kettle. People imagine sheriffs in the Old West as constantly dealing with gunfights, train robbers, or stampedes. But more often, it's this: marble rescues, sleepwalking seniors, and mediating disputes about who stole whose bucket. The real Wild West wasn't wild like a movie. It was wild like a toddler with access to a pantry. Back inside your office, you settle back down and glance at the ledger. You make a note. 2:03 a.m., marble recovered without incident. It's not standard procedure, but it amuses you. That's another reason duels are so rare in your town these days. People are too busy losing marbles, figuratively and literally. There's also the growing popularity of a new sheriff technique: scheduled confrontations. When 2 folks really want to have it out, you tell them to come to the square at high noon on Sunday. But then, you never show up, neither do they. By then, they've usually calmed down or decided it's not worth sweating through their nicest hat. It's surprisingly effective. You remember one such instance. 2 brothers, the Kinley twins, had a fierce argument over who'd inherited their father's best mule. You scheduled them for a duel on the hottest day of the month. When the time came, they showed up drenched in sweat, sat on the same bench, and ended up splitting a watermelon instead of firing pistols. Now they run a feed store together. Historians still argue over whether sheriffs back then were more peacekeepers or law enforcers. You know your answer. If you're doing your job right, nothing exciting ever happens. It's like being a fire extinguisher, absolutely necessary, but you hope no one ever needs to use you. You reach over and pour yourself a glass of water from the ceramic jug by the window. It tastes like minerals and slight disappointment. But it's cold, and that's enough. Out the window, the town sleeps. A few porch lanterns flicker low. Somewhere, a cat knocks over a tin pail. The sky has started shifting colors. The first pale hint of dawn pressing against the far edge of the dark. You think of the old stories, the dramatic standoffs, the dusty roads, the slow steps of two men facing off under the noon sun. But you know better. You know that the famous duels, the ones etched into folk songs and dime novels, were rare exceptions, not rules. The vast majority of people didn't want to die over spilled whiskey or poorly cooked beans. They wanted to live long enough to complain about taxes and compare boot brands. The notion of avoiding duels after lunch? It's less about digestion, more about fatigue. After a hot meal and a hotter sun, even the most vengeful soul starts reconsidering his priorities. Maybe it's not cowardice. Maybe it's wisdom, baked into the routine. You duel when you're hungry and furious, but after a hearty stew and a short nap, suddenly your honor feels less fragile. Outside, the wind shifts. You hear a rooster, possibly angry, possibly drunk. It's hard to tell in this town. You lean back, letting the chair creak beneath you, and smile. Just another night of glorious nothing. The sky bruises gently into morning, not with fanfare or fireworks, just a quiet shift from charcoal to dusty lavender, then to that pale, uncertain yellow that only shows up in towns like this. You rub your eyes. You're not sure when you last slept, but at this point, it might be ceremonial. You step outside. The street's empty, except for a tumbleweed doing its best dramatic performance, rolling gently, then stopping awkwardly by the saloon as if forgetting its line. You nod at it, the way you'd nod at an old acquaintance you don't feel like talking to. The boardwalk creaks under your boots. The town's waking up, slowly, like a bear in slippers. You hear the first clang of pans from the cafe and the rhythmic squeak of someone pumping water. It's oddly comforting. These are the sounds that keep this place moving, not gunshots or galloping horses, just pans and pumps. You head to the jailhouse again. There's a note on the door, scribbled in haste. "Sheriff, the goat's back in my pantry. I am not amused. Mrs. Penwell." You sigh. That goat is a menace. But you'll handle it after breakfast. Inside, you open the cabinet and find your emergency hardtack. It's like chewing bricks soaked in regret, but you do it anyway. That's the true spirit of law enforcement in the West. As you chew, your eyes drift to the wall where you've pinned every flyer for wanted criminals you've ever received. Most of them are yellowed, curling at the edges, and none of them look quite like the people who were eventually arrested, if they were arrested at all. One man turned himself in just to argue about the sketch. He was later released with an apology and a new hat. These flyers paint a different picture of the West than people usually imagine. You're not chasing outlaws every day. Most days, you're convincing someone not to marry their cousin after too much cider. Still, there are rules, gentle ones. And that's where something called reputation equilibrium comes in, a term you absolutely made up, but it works. Basically, in a town this small, everyone knows everyone. If you duel someone, you also duel your neighbor's cousin, your barber's brother-in-law, and possibly the guy who bakes your favorite peach cobbler. So you don't duel. Not because you're afraid, but because you're hungry, and emotional gunplay ruins your appetite. There's also the sandwich effect, another term of yours. It means most anger dissolves between two pieces of bread. Seriously. You've diffused more threats with roast beef than with reasoning. Feed a man, and he's suddenly less offended about your opinion on his mustache. You finish your hardtack and glance at the goat incident report, filed under repeat offenders. You're considering issuing it a tiny hat and badge. If you can't defeat your enemy, deputize it. There's a knock at the door. It's Madge, the Undertaker, holding a pie. You raise an eyebrow. She shrugs. I had leftover crust. Figured you looked underfed. You don't ask how she knows that. She always knows. You thank her, and she waves off your gratitude with a muttered, "Just don't get shot until I finish my tea." That's affection, Old West style. You slice into the pie. Cherry, slightly burned, which is how she likes it. It tastes like caution and kindness. And while you eat, you think about how this town survived. Not with constant standoffs, but with soft threats, hard pies, wandering goats, and post-lunch apathy. You glance at the old pistol hanging on the wall. It's polished, unused, almost ornamental. That's how you like it. You'd rather be a disappointment to violence than a slave to it. Historians still debate whether frontier justice was effective or chaotic. In your experience, it's mostly theatrics. Theatrics save face. And face is everything when there's only one mirror in town and it belongs to the barber/dentist/philosopher. You lean back again, the chair groaning in protest. Outside, the sun climbs lazily, casting golden strips across the floor. You feel something loosen in your chest. Not quite a yawn, not quite a sigh, just space. Room to breathe, room to exist without urgency. That's what you've been guarding all along. Not just the town, but the peace in between. And maybe, just maybe, that's why nobody duels after lunch. Because sometimes, when the goat's stolen another tin of flour, and Madge brings a burnt pie, and the tumbleweed can't remember its line, you remember who you are. Not a gunslinger, not a legend, just the one who kept it all from unraveling. Afternoon drapes itself over the town like a faded quilt, stitched with sunbeams, dust motes, and the occasional whiff of cooked beans from a distant pot. You've survived another morning without anyone drawing a gun, which statistically makes you one of the most successful sheriffs in the territory. You consider awarding yourself a medal made out of leftover tin and stubbornness. You decide to check on the post office. It's one room, 2 chairs, and a man named Lester who once tried to mail himself to Denver. Lester greets you with a solemn nod as he flips through letters like they're ancient scrolls. There's a parcel addressed to The Law, and you assume it's for you. Inside, socks, hand-knit, possibly by a secret admirer or someone confused about your shoe size. Lester says nothing, just sips his chicory brew like it's an elixir from a forgotten age. You nod back. Conversations here often die of natural causes. You step outside and find the sun fully committed now, baking the street into something that could fry an egg, or at least melt a boot heel. You don't walk fast, not because you're lazy, it's just that heat stroke isn't in the budget this year. People wave as you pass, soft, lazy waves that say, "We acknowledge your presence, but please don't make us move." You wave back with equal energy. You make a loop past the barber shop. Inside, old Tully is giving a haircut that looks more like wood carving. No one minds. He's the only barber within a 40-mile radius and doubles as the town's unofficial therapist. His rates are competitive. 1 haircut, 1 secret confessed. At the general store, there's a new shipment of licorice, horseshoe nails, and something labeled Miracle Elixir, guaranteed results or mild disappointment. You pick one up out of morbid curiosity. The label says it cures melancholy, freckles, and a tendency to dwell. You put it back gently, as if it might explode into unresolved feelings. Outside, near the well, a small cluster of children are playing sheriff and bandit. You notice 2 things immediately. 1, none of them want to be the sheriff. 2. The bandit has somehow acquired an actual lasso. You step in before anything gets rope burned, reminding them gently that law enforcement is less about ropes and more about paperwork. They look unconvinced. But this is the rhythm now. Your role is less gunslinger, more shepherd. You don't herd sheep, though. You herd opinions, tempers, misunderstandings. You diffuse more fights over pie recipes than property lines. And when tensions run high, you pull out the secret weapon, your voice. See, people expect a sheriff to shout, to bang a fist. But your voice is soft. Soft enough to be mistaken for indifference until people realize it's actually a kind of confidence. Soft power works best here, because the minute you escalate, people remember their own grudges. And this town, it has a memory like a mule and twice the temper. One of the blacksmith's apprentices comes up to you, cheeks pink with heat and nerves, says there's been a situation. Turns out the saloon piano player has fallen in love with the preacher's daughter. She, in turn, is in love with the idea of moving to Chicago. None of this is technically illegal, but it's enough to cause emotional turbulence in a town this small. You listen, you nod, you prescribe the usual, a walk, a sandwich, and at least one night of sleep before making any declarations of love, war, or relocation. Back at the jailhouse, you file that incident under future drama. There's a whole drawer for it. You settle into your chair again. It's getting creaky in a way that feels personal. From the window, you spot a group of ranchers arguing about irrigation rights, standing over a patch of land so dry it might crumble under strong language. You jot a reminder, bring them water, not arguments. Historians might say the Old West was defined by grit, but you've learned it was mostly defined by delay. Delayed trains, delayed rain, delayed tempers. The system works because everyone's too tired to fight all the time, including you. You let your eyelids drift a bit, just enough to rest, not enough to nap. There's a quiet joy in that in-between space. Not awake, not asleep, just floating somewhere in the lull of your own breath. You imagine how this will be remembered. Not in textbooks, not in ballads, maybe in a journal entry. Maybe in someone's recollection of a sheriff who didn't shout, didn't shoot, and somehow kept everything stitched together with dry wit and moderate snacking. Maybe that's enough. The evening slides in without a fuss. You watch it happen through the slatted window of the jailhouse, the sun bleeding out into streaks of dusty orange and soft purples, like someone spilled a bottle of sunset ink across the sky. The wind picks up just a little, just enough to stir the smell of mesquite and horses, and maybe someone's last attempt at dinner. You rise slowly, the chair groaning its usual protest, and you stretch like a man 50% sinew and 50% regret. The bones don't always cooperate, but they've gotten used to the idea of staying in the same county for more than a month. That's progress. There's still no one in the cells, just your coat, which you occasionally hang there for dramatic effect when someone asks, "How many outlaws you got today?" The coat's been convicted of 2 counts of impersonating a lawman and 1 charge of smelling like sweat and pipe tobacco. You do a slow patrol down the boardwalk, not because you expect trouble, but because trouble gets nervous when you do laps. It's psychology. Or maybe just superstition. Either way, it works. The saloon is quieter now, its piano reduced to soft background muttering, notes drifting out like forgotten promises. Inside, the regulars are winding down. The school teacher is nursing a cider like it's a scandal. The card players are engaged in a game of who can bluff being awake the longest. You tip your hat and keep walking. You make your final stop at the water tower, the unofficial lookout post for weather, gossip, and wayward cows. You climb halfway up and pause, hands resting on the railing. From here, the town looks like a diorama of human patience, a handful of buildings stitched together by dust, string lights, and stubborn hope. There are no gunfights, no standoffs, just the sound of a creaky windmill. And that's kind of the point. You think back to the myth of the Wild West, the legends of every man solving things with a pistol and a 6-syllable insult. And you can't help but smile. Because the real West, it's been slower, softer, smarter when it needs to be. Historians still debate whether the West was truly won, or if it just sort of got bored and sat down. They argue over the role of the sheriff, whether he was a hero, a bureaucrat, or just the least violent guy with a badge. You chuckle to yourself. If only they knew how many problems you solved with a loaf of bread and awkward silence. Back at the jail, the night has fully taken over. Lanterns flicker, crickets announce their agenda, and the town exhales, as if it's been holding its breath all day. You take off your boots, finally. The floor is cool beneath your feet. You light the last oil lamp, its glow turning the room into a pocket of warmth in the vast dark. And you sit. Not out of obligation, but because you're here, still here, long after the gunfighters rode off, after the gold ran out, after the legends moved on to flashier headlines. You remain, because someone needs to, not to enforce the law, but to remind people what peace feels like, a kind of quiet that doesn't come from fear, but from trust. You lean back, fingers laced behind your head, and close your eyes. The chair creaks. Somewhere, a horse whinnies in its sleep. And the last thing you hear before drifting off is the soft hush of the desert wind, whispering nothing urgent at all. And now, everything slows down. You've made it to the edge of the day, where even the dust settles and the world stops asking questions. You can almost hear the desert breathe, long, slow exhales carried by the wind, smoothing the sharp corners of thought until they disappear. Outside, the stars are taking their positions one by one, like old friends returning to familiar seats. The moon glows, not to illuminate, but to reassure, its soft light like a hand resting gently on your shoulder. You're safe here. There's no hurry. No noise left to chase, just the rhythm of your breath, easy and even, syncing with the hush of the night. The ground holds you, the sky accepts you, and everything in between just lets you be. Let the soft hum of the fan or the rustle of a blanket carry you deeper. No need to remember the story, no need to solve its riddles. Let it fade like a dream that served its purpose, quieting your thoughts one by one. Tomorrow will arrive when it's ready, but for now, you're not in charge. You're resting. You're okay. You're already halfway to sleep. Drift, float, settle. And in this quiet, remember, not every sheriff rides into the sunset. Some stay behind, just to make sure everyone else gets home safe.